It's Tuesday afternoon, it's 4 p.m. in Central Europe, and it's 3 p.m. here in Glasgow. And it's time for our Space Café 33 minutes today with Joel Spark
Nice to meet you.
about what's going on in Glasgow and why. But it's just how I call it here today. As always, we appreciate your participation and your ongoing feedback. We still have some issues with the stream, so we decided no LinkedIn today. So you're in or not. So, but you can, everyone who was about to watch it on LinkedIn can see the recording. And we're here in the lobby of Spire in Glasgow. So if you hear people around screaming, yelling, or some mechanics,
I hope not. Yeah,
that's happened, but it's afternoon, so never mind. So based on your feedback, and don't be shy to send it over to us, we will learn from that and improve, as you know. And as you know, I'm Torsten, I'm publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are an online platform and for new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I would like to thank to all our private and corporate sponsors that help to keep our journalism, independent journalism, alive. We really appreciate that, as we always tell you, and I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcasts. The latest one features Daniel Lieb from the Iceland Space Agency. We have also new exciting episodes in the Space Café radio with Josef Aschbacher on the results of the ministerial, Kevin O'Connell, Jeff Nember from Voyager, Jeremy Shield from Orbital Fab, yeah, and Akash from Pixel. The last ones are created by our marketing intern, Jim Murphy. So everything is worth to listen. Some heads up on that. One of our upcoming Space Café podcasts will be with this fine gentleman here, with Joel. Recorded last week here when Marcos was in town. What surprise. So we're all traveling to Glasgow. It's not for the weather, I can tell you. But now it's up to me to make that talk here exciting for you. And our fan shop is always open for you because it's on our website. So just a click away for you to become a real space watcher. And if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website and on YouTube. It's called YouTube. Yeah, YouTube. this new modern stuff. However, we are there. So let's talk about my guest. My guest today, actually, I'm his guest. Well, more or less in his living room. However, he is first of all an ISU alumni, very important. And if that would not be enough reason to talk with him, he's also the just announced Chief Satellite Architect of Spire. Congratulations to that.
Thank you very much.
Does it come with more honor?
I think I get a big hat, right? Like
wow.
A chief's hat, you know.
That's cool.
It'd be nice.
That's cool. A warm welcome. Yeah, live here in person. That's so cool. And for those of you that doesn't know Joel, he is Spire's co-founder and general manager of the space services. More about that later. He holds a master degree in space management from the ISU and a bachelor degree in aerospace engineering from the Carleton University, Canada.
That's right.
Canada. With a specialization in structural systems and vehicle design. So obviously he knows what he is doing. So welcome to my show. Let's start.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with the ISU thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I think you said that. I think we can say that you are one of the poster boys ISU have. So being myself an executive MBA 2012 alumni, I just do something with media, but you really nailed it. So tell us more about it.
Yeah, so we often say that the founding of Spire sounds a bit like the premise of a joke because you have a Canadian and a Belgian and an Austrian meet in a cafe in France and decide to start a space company. But yeah, we all met at ISU, so we were in the MBA program. And the idea for Spire was actually born out of Peter's thesis, or his capstone, which was around the business ecosystem of nanosatellites, and in particular how there is this growing gap between what the perception of what could be done with these nanosatellites and what could actually be done really driven by kind of that Moore's law coming to space and that exponential growth in technology was creating this opportunity for providing real value from, constellations of nanosatellites in space. So it was really born out of that Spire was created, and we moved to San Francisco, and kind of the rest was history.
Cool. Yeah, we will talk about it later on. And I have to say, I listened already to the raw version of the Space Café podcast, so I will try to inspire our audience to learn more about what you guys do than what is already in this absolute fantastic fireside chat. Marcus is doing a great job. So it's and he speaks better English and he looks better than me. But however, details. Spire builds satellites. Check. So we can see them here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So done. Job done. CubeSats are great. You operate satellites. Yeah. Check. Right. What is special about Spire that made you one of the new space companies?
Yeah, it's a little bit of luck, a little bit of skill, a lot of hard work. We were, so again, in 2012, when we came out of ISU, we were really getting into using fleets of nanosatellites in ways that hadn't been done before. And what we really focused on was non-imaging or non-optical ways of providing data. Our mission was really to provide data from space to improve life on Earth. And we found that there was this tremendous opportunity because of the explosion of capabilities in the CubeSat realm, driven by spin-ins from the handset, cell phone manufacturing in the form of SDRs, to take some
SDRs?
A software-defined radio. Thank you.
Oh, just for the audience.
Yeah, thank you.
No.
Yeah, the idea that you can have a chip in space that can do something and you can reprogram it. An analogy is the same way that a guitar always sounds like a guitar, but your laptop can sound like a guitar, it can sound like a piano, because you're artificially creating that sound wave from a chip. Same thing with software-defined radio. It's rather than having an analog radio that can only do one thing, a software-defined radio is very flexible. You can reprogram it in space to do whatever you want. And so that's what we saw coming in from the cell phone industry, this ability to put fleets of satellites equipped with software-defined radio in space and deliver data at volumes and in ways that hadn't really been done before. And thankfully, we got that right.
Yeah.
And today, our data is being used, for science. NASA is using it for climate science. It's being integrated operationally into NOAA's weather forecast. It's being used here in Europe, in ECMWF. So there's a lot of really, really interesting ways now that this data is being ingested.
It sounds so easy to say, hey, our satellites are software-defined radios, not saying these are living betas in space, and we try to make them work. But how do you provide data when you say that these are not non-optical data? So you're listening, you're not watching the Earth, you're listening to the Earth. But
exactly.
What do you hear and what do you make out of that?
So we hear, for example, ships communicate with each other with this protocol called AIS. And I think most people know about that today. So we're the #1 global provider of monitoring of ship traffic by looking at AIS messages. So there's kind of machine-to-machine IoT style things that we hear. We also look at how, in particular, GPS signals are bent by our atmosphere or reflected off our oceans or soil to provide insights about our planet. So our kind of killer app is radio occultation. That's where you look at how a GPS signal is refracted as it passes through our atmosphere. And from that, you can calculate what the pressure and temperature of the air is. And that's the data that's really, really used to forecast the weather ultimately. So the same way.
I would say that's cool. That sounds really like cool shit.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I mean, it's not tangible, but you say, okay, we get this reflection from the GPS data, or is it all the GNSS systems, or
it is? I say GPS, but it is all the GNSS system. So you're looking at what's the extent that a GNSS or GPS signal refracts or bends through the atmosphere. We also look at, or when it skims off a smooth surface like an atoll or ice, we can measure the precise altitude of that ice, so within 10 centimeters. And from that, you can monitor sea ice extent, but also to some extent classify whether it's old ice or new ice. Really interesting, climate measurements. The other one that I really love is, when you're looking out over the ocean and it's a calm day and you see a reflection of the setting sun, and it kind of looks like a little disc versus if it's
a green
choppy.
flash.
I'm sorry?
It's a green flash.
No,
it's the last minute.
Yeah, no, I mean the reflection.
Okay.
So when you see the sun setting over the ocean, and if it's really choppy, it kind of spreads out, or if it's smooth, it stays still. That same effect happens with radio waves. So we use that and look how GPS signals reflect off soil, for example, to get an estimation of soil moisture content. And by looking in different frequencies, you can actually penetrate a little bit below the surface of soil and look at root zone as well. So all of these types of data are really important in terms of understanding what is our planet doing right now. So weather forecasting, what is it doing over a longer time scale, for climate forecasting, and really driving action to respond to and mitigate the effects of climate change.
We will come to the impact you have with your work later on, but just to be clear, when you say we can track ship based on the IAS data, how accurate is that at the end? Are we talking about centimeters, meters, kilometers? Yeah, there's somewhere is a ship.
Yeah, so we do a few different things. So the ship knows generally where it is based on a GPS receiver. So we look at the receive position. We also do some amount of validation of that. So we have enough satellites that we can triangulate where that message is coming from. And you can actually compare to say, okay, is this ship actually where it's saying where it is? And sometimes there's very benign reasons why those might be different, like maybe your GPS transmitter is broken or something, or you've got a loose wire somewhere. Sometimes there can be nefarious purposes, like people saying I'm going this way, but I'm actually going this way to do illegal fishing. So that's one of the values.
Really? People do that?
So, yeah, it's called spoofing. And that's not.
It's such a bad world.
It's for example, if you take a representative sample of around 60,000 ships that one of our partners, Global Fishing Watch, did a study on, 5,000 of them were in some way doing some form of illegal fishing. So it's it's not a niche problem.
We talk about 8-9% then.
Exactly. It's not on the fringes. It's a significant portion of the activity.
And we're not talking about piracy or all the other activities where people, I think, will not have an IES transmitter.
No, absolutely. What's fascinating is now, because we have such ubiquitous coverage of AIS, even switching off your AIS transmitter is very suspicious now, because you can see that the second it comes off, and you can task other assets like radar or optical that are maybe not good for scanning. But when you spot some suspicious activities, you can do really interesting things.
But that is in an activity you do via partner, or are you doing it by?
Right. Okay. Yeah, so we don't do radar, but we work with radar partners and optical partners. It was used recently to monitor how grain is actually being stolen from Ukraine, and is being quasi-laundered on the high seas through transshipments. And our data, along with others, is being used to identify that kind of activity.
Okay.
That's a bit of a downer topic.
Yeah, I know. So that's pretty frustrating. I mean, not just the weather, but however,
it's frustrating. I also find it inspiring, though, to see that these activities were always happening, but as a result of the absolute revolution that's happening and the capability of what's happening in space, now our decision makers are being more and more equipped to fight these things.
That's a good point. So we are going up on the motivation side. As I'm a proud global Scot, I have to say I have to ask the Irish Canadian in you, see why ask Glasgow questions, and I'm not sure it's not just the weather, or maybe it is. So I don't know. I mean, it's always that's where it's coming from, and I know it's just being as stereotype as possible. But on my way inbound yesterday, I met Agnes Robertson, your Minister of Culture of the Scottish Parliament. And they seems to be, and we had a chat, and they seems to be very, very keen on space. I mean, even he is not the tech minister; he's on culture, and said, "Yeah, we understand, we support it." Are they that supportive?
Absolutely. I mean that's a significant answer to your question of why are we here. Scotland has a good confluence of factors. You've got a really great local culture in terms of people and innovation. There's been a long history of innovation in the UK in general. Fantastic universities. We have that inflow of new, excited, fresh talent into the market. There's an existing market talent pool, especially in electronics, being born out of the cell phone manufacturing that used to be here. It's since been moved offshore, and now those people are looking for the next best thing to work on. And there's a bit of a space cluster forming as a result of driving an innovation and investment led by the Scottish government and otherwise. So you've got the money, you've got people, you've got the community, and you've got that culture. When all that comes together, it's pretty obvious to me why Glasgow is kind of leading the space fund.
Okay, I get it, and I learned today that you have 4 universities here.
That's right.
Amazing. I never expected it, but there's still potentially the hunt for talents. I mean, you have now a new player coming into town as well, want to create 500 jobs, as I heard. So I mean, to find 500 people for the space sector in a certain area, regardless where it is, it's a challenge. So that means stealing people from you and the others.
It's a challenge everywhere. I mean, so we're in many different. We have 3 sites in the US, 1 in Canada, 2 here in the UK, 1 in Europe, and 1 in Singapore. And I've started, establishing a presence in Australia as well. So, and I would say one thing that's universal in all those places is good people are hard to find. But that's what I think we're so proud of is here at Spire, the community of people who've managed to create.
They do it for the mission.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, people get it.
No, money is totally overrated. I know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's
we do media. Come on.
You got to feed yourself, right? Everyone's got to eat. But I think what we recognize, and this is absolutely true in the space industry in general, is that people want to have impact. People want to make the planet better, and we see there's real opportunity.
When hearing you guys talk, and you mentioned before, you use Moore's law analogy as or an engineer. For me, it's the duplication of capacity in a fixed time frame.
Exactly.
So in your case, you double the capacity of your Lemur satellites per year, per evolution, as we can see it here. Or
yeah, and it's when you look across the industry, and this is actually one of those things that Pierre identified in his study. It was, what are all the different benchmarks in terms of power being generated, onboard compute capability, data you can produce, data you can downlink? All of those we saw were increasing. I think it was 10x every 5 years, had been happening at a relatively steady cadence, even when we were getting into it. And we've seen that progression continue. So both the satellites do more with less, and so we're able to, with the same amount of power and pointing and data downlink, provide more value, and we are able to produce more data. So part of that is, because everything's software defined, you can move more and more sophisticated algorithms on board to extract more data from
and
those.
you do that actually as well with your satellites.
That example I gave of the skimming of signals and measuring ice, that was developed after we'd already launched, I think, 6 satellites, and it was deployed to the fleet. And so you can use software upgrades both to increase the types of data you can produce, but also to gain more insights from that data. So with our satellites, we include a lot of spare compute capacity on board and increasingly use the computational power of the satellite to do more and more of data processing actually in space and really just pull down the insights.
Will there be an end of this technical curve? So,
question. I mean, you're even saying that about Moore's law itself.
Yeah, how much data can we consume? How much data can we process as human beings? I mean, we all are overwhelmed by the influx of data we get on social media. Yeah, just to saying that, I mean, computers can do more, but the question is,
it's it's always, especially in environments that are growing exponentially, you should always be very careful of making predictions about how far technology will go. We certainly don't see it slowing down on the rate of technology growth and new data which is being produced. In addition to that, we are really only just scratching the surface in terms of the value that can be extracted from the data we're producing today. And so between those two factors of we are producing more data, we're getting it faster and we're getting it in new different ways. And we are also at the same time getting better at using that data and making more meaningful decisions. I think there's a lot more to do.
Let's talk about the business unit you're heading, Spire Satellite Services.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we started our mission, it was data from space to improve life on Earth. And the way we did that was by building our own satellites, our ground station network, our automation, everything to get that data to the ground. And what we realized was there was a lot of solved problems that we saw other organizations struggling with. Getting your first satellite working. Once you have one satellite working, going to 10, going to 100, going to more, and operating all that in a cohesive way, getting ground stations licensed, getting access to launch. All of these things was wasted effort that we thought, other people shouldn't be wasting that either. And so space services is our offering where third parties can put their application on our satellite and operate it through the web using our satellites, our ground stations, our constellation automation, everything. So they don't really need to think about it. It's kind of like it's just living in the cloud for them. I say application because it can be a hosted payload, so it can be a physical device. We even have some people just deploy code to the satellites and deploy new applications without even launching a satellite.
Interesting. So friends in Munich and in Canada told me, get our satellites, get our payloads shown to you. So do we want to talk about that?
My payload or your payload? Which one?
Oh, their payload. Your
Which one?
Your customers.
Oh, yes. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's like talking about your children, right? Like you're not supposed to have favorites. So I have to be careful. I think when I look at what
I have a favorite child. I only have one, so
that's easy. Yeah, that's allowed.
Yeah.
Me too, actually. I didn't even pick up on that. Yeah, so what I find truly inspiring is the different ways that people are using the platform. To name a few, not all, and not in any order of preference. So as some examples, Aurora Tech is a German startup company. They are using a really novel, combined infrared and optical camera augmented with AI and machine vision to detect wildfires from space. And what they will ultimately seek to do is a wildfire igniting anywhere on the planet within 30 minutes of a notification with a geocoordinate, which is obviously hugely important for responding to the effects of climate change, but interestingly mitigating them. 17 to 20% of global carbon emissions come from wildfire. So if you can make a dent in that, that's a huge mechanism to reduce emissions. GHGSat in Canada, from Canada, they're doing greenhouse gas, specifically focused on methane, which was interestingly one of the major outcomes of COP26. Now, the prior one, which was actually just in view of our building here, was tracking of methane. So that's obviously a very direct input to weather forecasting. We have Myriota and Orbitare on the IoT side. North Star, Earth and Space, really interestingly looking space to space and tracking other objects from space. Are
they really looking or listening? So is it an optical?
So they are looking.
Okay, so you have an optics then on them.
We have others that are doing radar. So we're actually doing space to space, looking at micrometeor. That's Findus with the Adler mission. But yeah, so North Star is doing optical imaging space to space to provide services into space and anywhere.
You're obviously flying on low Earth orbit. Is cislunar moon on your radar? I know you're a listed company. You can talk about the future too much, but just envision, would that fit into your plans, or is it depending on your clients?
So our mission is using data from space to improve life on Earth. And at the moment, we're focused on low Earth orbit because that's where we see there's the richness. But it's also where our niche is in terms of the satellite technology, right? What we seek to use is space from low Earth orbit in a sustainable way so that we're not creating space debris, and gathering data where the value comes from being everywhere. And that's real. So that's why low Earth orbit is really our niche.
Let's focus a bit of the impact. straightforward. What impact provide your satellites to a Joe Doe on the street? And I mean, I know Peter was also active on creating the space sustainability rating many moons ago.
Yeah.
So, but coming back to Joe Doe, what is tangible for him?
I mean, 80% of global trade
Mhm.
goes through ships, right?
Yep.
And we have a global real-time view of what's happening. And so if you think of, Ever Given, for example, wedging in it was a Suez Canal, or I think there's one.
So you have seen it coming.
Which we wouldn't have seen it coming, but when things like that inevitably continue to happen, how does that impact you? How does that impact supply chains?
Yeah.
How does that impact the movement of people? This data is absolutely critical for things like that. How many, I forget the number of what percent of the world gets its food from fish. But again, you need to keep an eye on these things. So generally, maritime domain awareness affects us all in ways that, generally we don't appreciate, at the time until things go wrong. Very similar with aircraft, right? Global monitoring of aircraft. I think people feel a bit more personal connection with that. I've been on aircraft, but very similar. That's where the remaining 20% is. When it comes to weather, increasingly, and unfortunately, it's becoming something that is more and more relevant for people as extreme weather events become more and more frequent and more intense. It's very important that we know who we're going to evacuate, right? And to what extent and where do we evacuate people to, or predicting these events like hurricanes a little bit more in advance so we have more time. And unfortunately, these are the real ways that this data is driving decisions which impact massive amounts of people on a daily basis.
But let's stay on that, because we had also in Central Europe, we had these catastrophes last year with the floodings in Germany, an area where you never would guess that there is a flooding. But you said you work with NOAA together. What is in state, and there's FEMA behind for the warning. So, but let's look here into Europe, into the UK, into our Central Europe. Are you working with the local authorities together already? So how do they use your data?
Yeah, so we provide data into ECMWF in the same way that we provide it to NOAA. So they use our data from our satellites as part of the daily weather forecast that's used by everybody. In particular, actually, when in March, April 2020, when COVID hit and everything was grounded, aircraft are actually an immense source of data for weather forecasting. And this was something here in the UK that people realized, oh my gosh, we're worried that there would be a degradation in the quality of weather forecasts because we just had this massive source of data taken away from us. And that's not, when people think of weather forecasting, sometimes they think, oh, am I going to take an umbrella out today or not? Which, I mean, in Glasgow is always yes.
Yeah. I was about to say,
exactly here. But I mean, if you're in an airport, if you work in a mine, if you work in farming, I mean, there's like real day-to-day important decisions that need to happen. So what we did is we actually provided our data to UK Med for free, and that was able to prevent a massive degradation in the quality of the weather.
But they have to adapt their algorithms as well, because they get raw data from you.
So the data that we provide, the radio occultation, is, can be ingested. We're not the only one who's provided it. It was actually a technique that was invented by NASA. And what we've done is we've just done it in a satellite the size of a loaf of bread, not a much larger platform. But what that means is we can deploy many more of them, and we can produce the data far more cost effectively and on a scale larger than NASA can provide. So it's data that the weather forecasters know how to ingest. And they've actually spent a lot of time evaluating our quality and our APIs and, doing impact studies. So by this point, they were prepared to receive it. So the time was quite right.
Pretty good. Today, I can't see the screen on this distance, so I don't see if we get the warnings from our production team already on the time, what we usually get. So, but let's speed up on that here. Scotland just published in Bremen officially the space sustainability roadmap. What is your stake in it? how do you contribute to that?
So I mean, we're an operator in space. We've launched 150 spacecraft. We have 100, a little over 100, 120 in space still today. We always launch into a very, very low Earth orbit where we know that our satellites will, decay. And
Within
5-10 years.
Okay.
We launch a lot of different types of satellites, so obviously it depends on how high you launch them, how heavy they are, and how big your solar arrays are.
Do they have propulsion or active remote?
Most of them don't use active methods, but that's actually a benefit because you don't need to rely on those. You just know by the laws of physics it is going to decay.
So you just rotate them into the sun and then they're fine.
Yeah, and they're just on the edge of the atmosphere where passively, without any action from us, they will re-enter. It gives us actually the ability to control them because there's just enough atmosphere to, if we want to speed up, we can go full drag, drop the orbit a little bit and speed up, or if we want to slow down, we'll, go to a lower drag configuration and maintain a high altitude. So we have some control there.
Are your satellites registered under the UK government or the US?
So we have some in the US and some under Luxembourg. So we do a little bit of both.
Okay, got it. How hard is it to find talents here? I mean, we talked about the universities and the ecosystem here, but I mean, it's a huge thing all over the place. And talking this morning with people here on the campus as well, it is an issue they want to address. So, beside, as you mentioned before, people work here for the mission because it's cool to work for Spire. It has a global branding. Checks a lot of boxes. But how you get new one in? I mean, you're not alone in this market, as we know. I mean, especially the small sat market with these advanced technologies. I would say in Europe we have 20 manufacturers of our CubeSats. Maybe more potentially there. So.
Yeah, it's not just a space problem, it's a global problem. We're not graduating enough technical people, we're not graduating enough lawyers, enough accountants, like they just don't exist. And so this is not just a Glasgow problem. That being said, I think
Don't say it too loud. Our Eleanor is a space lawyer.
Oh yeah.
In education, or she is on the way to become a lawyer. So but don't join them, stay with us.
No, we cast a fairly wide net because we don't just hire from within the space industry. And actually that's been one of our core principles, has been we want enough space people that we don't make mistakes that a space person would make. But we learn so much by taking people who don't have the preconceived biases or notions from it must be done this way. So that's partly the way we've mitigated by being international and by being very open, really looking at what do people want to accomplish? Are they mission driven like the rest of us? And being as unbiased as possible about where talent comes from everywhere.
I see. Great. It was pretty a perforce race covering dozens of topics within this very short talk that we have. Thank you very much. You
absolutely
really made it.
For having me.
I'm sure there will be absolute more room for much more. But also to you, watch out for the Space Café podcast with Joel. And I think we want to release it by the 3rd of January. So to start your year with, if I'm not mistaken. So, Eleanor, do we have our questions? I can't see them here, actually.
Yes, we do.
Oh. So anything that stands out?
Okay, so Mark asks, do you want to take them?
Yeah, can you track the magnetic fields of the Earth or data for disaster forecast of floods and quakes or volcano eruptions?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in that one. So we do track the magnetic field. All of our satellites, have an attitude grade magnetometer. We're working on the MagQuest program, which is a program being run by the NGA to develop a new system for providing data to the World Magnetic Model. So we're one of the teams working on that. So that's not an operational mission; it's still in development. Some of the other ones were on, I think, volcanoes and tsunamis. We did some really interesting studies with the European Space Agency and UK Space Agency on using data that we gather actually from our ionosphere. As part of doing RO, we need to correct out radio occultation, our weather forecasting. We need to correct out the influence of the ionosphere. And so we actually get a lot of measurements about our ionosphere as a byproduct. And there was some really interesting science showing you might be able to monitor and predict tsunamis. I think even earthquakes was one of the ideas. So we did a project with them, and ultimately it didn't, I don't think it panned out. The science didn't quite work out. But yeah, you can glean a lot from the ionosphere, and we do that. But it's part of our general, what we call Earth intelligence.
Are you feeding your data also into the what is it, or data twin or digital twin model that ESA is planning to do or is doing already? I mean, that's one of the accelerators.
I think we've been in discussions with them. I don't believe our data is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think one of our data is being used operationally there. I think we are one of the partner missions, but it's not going to the digital twin and all that.
Mark also asked, how interoperable are these data? They are, or are they cryptic just for the rest of the world?
So what we do is actually we merge data from our satellites with other sources. That's actually something we take on. So for example, in maritime, we use data from our satellites, but we also use from terrestrial-based receivers, from third-party systems, from what we call dynamic AIS. We merge all that together because at the end of the day, our customers don't care if the data comes from space or not. They just care if it solves a problem for them. And so actually most of our customers don't necessarily even know us as a space company, just as a data company.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
We try to make it boring. Try to make space not really part of it.
I've heard it before. Yeah. So, but we still think
I can't help but find it interesting.
No, don't believe anyone who say that.
Try and fail. We try and fail.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have the people here. So
yes,
that's okay. Last question here from Chris. Maritime tracking is Spire's killer application, but won't you expect your Earth intelligence service to experience massive growth? A lot of crucial climate data has got to do with shipping emissions and maritime currents.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say, I mean, maritime is a massive thing that we do. It's certainly not the only thing we do. We have the, maritime aviation weather forecasting, right? And Earth intelligence is a massive part of what we do. Because of the radio occultation and other types of data. What I also find exciting about that is there's a lot of, I don't want to say the word synergy, there's a lot of opportunities to partner between some of our Spire data products and our space services customers. So for example, with the Aurora Tech, they're tracking wildfires from space, and we're working with a company called Chiron to use soil moisture data, so one of our Earth intelligence products, to predict where wildfires might happen. So you can see how there's a lot of synergies between the Earth intelligence products that Spire is doing and the space services, products and our customers and what they're doing.
Data are our future.
Absolutely.
Eleanor, that's from our end. Back to you.
Thank you, Thorsten. Thank you, Joel. It's been amazing listening to you live. But before we say goodbye, let me remind you of the few more events until the year is over. Tomorrow, on the 7th of December at 2 p.m. Central European Time, 10 a.m. Brazilian time, we have our Space Café Brazil by Ian Grosner. On the 15th of December, we have our last two events at 12 at midday. We have our Space Arbitration Association event with Laura Zelensky on the question, what's next for space arbitration? And on the 15th, later that day at 4 p.m., we have our Space Café Israel by Meidat Pariente. And all events are going to be online on Eventbrite. And as always, we will love to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up for our daily and our bi-weekly newsletters. And if you'd like to treat yourselves with something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us in the supporter program. Thank you, Joel, for that insightful talk. And please, Thorsten, thank Joel on my end and our end.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
thanks again.
She
to
said
the
thank you.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Sorry, I can't hear.
And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing that great job week by week again. And thank you all very much for your interest today. Thank you for joining us. I hope to see you in the next weeks in upcoming events. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. Take care and don't forget, become a space watcher. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.